Hello, hello. Welcome to Let's Talk Maywood on Diversity Today Media, Summer Edition. I hope everyone is out there having a great summer, keeping cool. Hopefully, dry because there's been a lot of floods going on in the Midwest and in particularly the South. And I'm going to talk to my co-host, my co-laborer in the vineyard, and expert investment advisor, Terrence Hollingsworth, about the impact of what's been taking place in our atmosphere and how that impacts us economically and financially. So, without further ado, I'd like to bring on my co-host, Terrence Hollingsworth. Terry, how you doing?
Doing good. How are you, sir?
Good evening, my brother. How's it out there in Iowa? The weather.
It's kind of like it was in Chicago. I mean, one day Chicago had a big flood, and the next day it came to Iowa, and it's kind of trash. But this weather we've been living with, right?
Yeah, for sure. I know here in the DMV, we've been blazing hot, man. I mean, we've reached a heat index for last off and on for the last 2 weeks of about 106 degrees.
Yowza.
So it's been blazing hot. I mean, blazing like hot as Hades. It's just hot, hot. But like Pastor Wiley once said, hell is a lot hotter than
I
here
know,
on
right?
earth. So I won't complain. I just thank God for having AC and just being smart and that stuff. But you know, I want to start off by asking you this question, Terry. First of all, our prayers go out to everyone who has lost their lives, particularly in Texas and the state of Texas and Louisiana, and other parts of the country in the Midwest and the Southwest, particularly because of the flood. Have you noticed an impact in the stock market because of that and how Donald Trump wanted to take FEMA away or reduce his funding to provide that kind of support that's needed to those who are impacted by that?
No, that's a good question. It's not a one-to-one, right? And the one thing that we also should always keep in mind, the stock market is very forward-looking. So anything that's happening immediately doesn't show up in the stock market necessarily in the same week or even the same month. However, um, it's been a few weeks since we've been on, and so there's a lot to talk about in regards to stock market and what President Trump has done, right? So you think about almost a month ago, um, he he named the tariff thing, and then the stock market is sold off a ton, and then since then, stock market has made all-time highs on S&P 500 and the
Hmm.
Nasdaq.
Right.
And so when we think about what the effects of tariffs are going to be on the economy and things like this, it's not fully apparent, but I could tell you this, and this is just a personal opinion of mine, the thing that I noticed. Um, I do a lot of community events. I go to things and I see things that are happening, and I see less people at these events, right? So, Essence Fest, for example, said, they didn't say it, but people that have been there for a few years, they basically said that it's less crowded, right? Is that a direct effect of what we see in inflation and the tariffs and
Right.
things like this? I think so.
Yeah.
Um, one might say social media has also had effect on these things, but I just think that it kind of shows up in small instances like that, and
Yeah.
something to keep in mind.
Well, it's just like when they report the CPI, it's not in real time. And they talk about the impact if we're in a recession or inflation or whatever the case may be, a technical depression, which has happened in decades. But you don't get that in real time.
Absolutely.
There may be some sell off, like you said, like didn't Trump implement a 25% tariff on Japan? Was that recently, as far as last week? So that impacted it, whatever. But in terms of how strong the economy is and the effects of it, we won't know really how impactful the summer months were until probably what the end of the year, maybe.
Yeah. So what you just said about CPI, which Consumer Price Index, right?
Right.
and how we measure a recession. Well, a recession is 2 quarters, which is 6 months,
Right.
and it's 6 months looking backwards,
Right.
right? And so, Donald Trump has been calling for lower interest rates, lower interest rates, lower
Right.
interest rates, and the Fed chief,
Yeah.
Jerome Powell, has been
Yeah.
saying, well, we need to see the data. We don't know what the
Right.
effects of tariffs are going to be on the economy just yet. And so, no, we won't lower interest rates until we know it. But that is a really fundamental um, piece of analysis when we talk about investing, for example.
Hmm.
There is fundamental analysis and there is
Technical.
technical analysis,
Hmm.
right? Fundamental analysis tells us what to buy. Technical analysis tells us when to buy. Fundamental analysis, part of the problem that you have with that between the two is analysts generally are not going to make a decision until they actually see the data when companies report the number. So um, we might think that a company is making more money than they are, or whatever, but
Right.
they don't change their rating or their recommendation until they actually see the reported number. And sometimes technical analysis can give you some
Yeah.
insight. You'll see companies trade higher going into the quarterly report.
Right.
And a lot of times it's just because, people are talking. Executives are
Right.
saying, hey, we're going to beat this number. And they're speaking that, even though they're not supposed to, it happens.
Yeah. Yeah. So that reminds me, you just mentioned about, companies reporting after the quarter or after consecutive quarters or the end of the year, whatever the case may be. But I think about social media, like Target, they had the protests and things like that, and stock for Target went down. Um, is that just cyclical? Is it actually because people did a blackout on Target? I mean, do we actually know?
Okay,
Really?
so
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
so let's dive into that a little bit. So here's the truth. Regardless of what you think, let's analyze Target for a second. Target core customer are who? Not the black
Oh,
community,
right, right,
right? White
right,
women,
right.
right? And so, yeah, we can say the numbers, there have been numbers out there that black consumers are spending $12 million
Right,
a month at Target and things like this. However, I'm going to say this: Target is probably one of the better companies out there that can predict their sales, knows who their customers are, and things like this.
right,
And what Target knows is that the impact of black consumers is not as much as what they hoped it was be and what we think it is,
right,
right?
for
And
sure.
so the value of the stock market or the value of Target stock and lower sales wasn't black people boycotting, it was white people or white women
Right,
that stopped shopping at Target and moved over to um Costco,
right,
Walmart, and believe it or not, the Dollar Tree, they are all saying that the consumers that spend 100,000 plus, they're seeing an increase in those consumers buying from their stores,
yeah,
which means, guess where they're not going? They're not going to Target,
right,
right?
yeah. That's
Now,
yeah. Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, no, keep going, keep going. You good?
So now on the other side, and I try not to do this a lot, but I'm going to do this because hopefully we can add some value here. But think about Target and our approach as the black community, some of the black leaders. Boycott, we're not going to go there. We're not going to go there. Things like this. Look how we're hurting them.
Yeah,
What we really are doing is creating investor wealth through Target. So Target is expected to spend to make about $9 a share, right? You could have bought it a couple weeks at around $96. Now
hmm,
it's 105 or
right,
103, somewhere around there.
right,
And the sector trades at roughly 16 times earnings. So you take 9 times 16, you should come up with like 120 something. I don't know off the top of my head.
144,
So
144.
144.
Mm-hmm.
So in the investment world, fair value on target on the stock is 144. right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's opportunity for people, investors. Where can I make money? I think so, right?
Hmm.
And so, should the strategy be boycotting, whether it be marching or whether it be not buying, going into Target and buy, or should we be recognizing that there's value here, and if we buy the stock and if we buy it in mass, then everything that we're asking for, we can get.
Right. It's a great point. It reminds me of the 1970s, 1980s, where there was a book written by Rebel for Radicals by Saul Alinsky, the late Saul Alinsky, a Jewish guy who, he was opposite of doing, he did boycott. He had a lot of support boycott in the community, but what they did was they bought shares of companies, corporations like the Targets and Walmarts that was back then. Why did he do that? Because he wanted more control. He wanted more voting power. You wanted to change policy. Well, boycotting things like that is a good temporary fix, but it's not a long term solution. So what he did was he had enough votes to have a majority, and then that's when they started fighting against discrimination, racism, sexism, and all that kind of stuff. We're talking about the 1960s and 1970s, um, where he started to do that. You want to say something?
Yeah, so I almost never have the conversation that we're having right now
Hmm.
in a public forum.
Right.
We
Yeah, we
talk
don't.
about it. Yeah, we talk about it in master's classes and stuff like this.
Right.
Mostly because I have an ingrained belief. Bible says what? Don't cast your pearls to swine,
Yeah.
right? And so when I speak about very in-depth strategies and stuff like that, I almost never do it in these forums because number one, I don't want people coming taking my words and using them as their
Right.
own.
Right. Right. Which happens.
But also,
Which happens.
yeah, and also there's a truth that the stuff that I do, we don't just randomly talk about stuff. So we're
Yeah.
not, we're not going out and trying to grab a coalition and saying, hey, we want to
Right.
attack this target thing like this.
Right.
But today we're talking about it. So I'm going to say this.
Hmm.
You're correct in the professional world, and when we can go back, and we have the benefit of going back in history, and going back in history, we can say when we were marching in the civil rights movement, and
Right.
when we were doing these things, we were looking for economic equity,
Right.
right? And now you have to ask yourself this question: did we achieve that goal?
Mm. Did we? Have
No.
we? Why not?
Absolutely not, because the data is telling us that home ownership is lower than it has been in the history of the black consumers.
Right.
Um, our wealth is higher, but so is
Mhm.
our debt,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so and I'm not disparaging or saying anything bad about the civil rights movement. It did some.
Right.
We got what we asked for,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so the question is, how does our generation build on that, on what we asked for, and what is our next steps forward, and things like this? Because we agree on this thing. The one thing that we absolutely want is economic opportunity,
Hmm.
we want to close the wealth gap between black and white, and all those things. How do we
Yeah.
do it? That is the main question.
Yeah.
And there's the politics of it, right? The things that happen in Washington,
Right.
and how the votes matter, but at the end of the day, our generation has the most access than any other generation,
Ever.
and we
Ever.
need to advance some conversations about what that looks like.
Well, you mentioned that we rarely have these conversations in public forum, but when you know what you talk about, it goes a long way. But when you don't, when you try to mimic it, it would never be authentic. It would never be at the substance would not be there. People who know, like in this case, finance, they'll know that person's full of crap, and they will drop off. They will definitely disappear unless
Well,
you try to spin it and you start to talk. You create your own words. Um,
yeah, you know what?
you try to build finance.
This is what I say about this. I say people. you learn a lot about people. And one thing that I know in these situations is a lot of times people want to fit in, right? And
Right.
so the outliers or the new thoughts and stuff like that, they're so hard to advance because, oh, excuse me, because um people generally are uncomfortable with new ideas,
Right.
right? And it's unfortunate because what we really need is people that can critically think about problems and what the solutions are.
Right.
um
Right. Right.
we had the conversation. I was fortunate to be able to engage and sit with the conversations about reparations, right?
Hmm.
And how do we approach it? And I'll tell you, in a lot of instances, I was the lone voice in the room saying, no, we do not want to pour reparations into education,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? At
And I'm
least
sure they got
not
some raised
to,
eyebrows.
yes,
They're
sir.
probably
Yes,
like, Negro,
sir.
what you talking about? Meet me outside. What you talking
Yeah,
that
I know,
crazy?
right? So consider this part of it. We are the most educated generation in the history of Black America, right?
No question. No
We
question.
also have the lowest net worth in the history of Black America,
And how is
right?
that? How is that
Well,
for
that's
those?
absolutely right.
Yep.
It's hard to think
Yep.
and understand that coming out of slavery and things like this, Black people had more own more land than they
Yep.
own today,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, if it was education that created wealth, then over the last 50 years, our net worth should have increased. The wealth gap should have decreased. But instead of this, it has increased. And so that tells us the smart people, and I say that facetiously, right?
Right.
That people with different thoughts and ideas need to all sit at the same table and flush out what we're after.
Yeah.
And that's NAACP at the national level.
Yeah.
It's the Black Caucus. It is these places that have a lot of decision makers, and hopefully that'll happen soon.
I think about what's happening in the village of Maywood and how African Americans have moved to the village from the South as early as post slavery. As soon as it ended officially in Texas, in
Hmm.
1865, because the Emancipation Proclamation was, instituted in 1863, and we got our victory in 1865. Um, Everybody migrated westward, or mostly northern, including Maywood. Um, how did they get through? Because they still dealt with racism. You still couldn't cross the tracks past Washington Boulevard. There was still redlining, in the
Yeah.
beginning of the 20th century in the village of Maywood. They got through it. They owned land. And it just kind of built from there and matriculated from there. They went to school. They had black owned businesses, in Maywood. And when we moved there in the early 70s from the northwest side of Chicago, the projects, we felt we made it, but we were able to go and buy land. My parents bought land. My dad he worked for the post office as an engineer. My mom was an educator, but they didn't make a lot of money, but they made it. But then that was the silent generation. And then, you had the baby boomers born between 46 and 64. You said that was the greatest wealth creation in history, right? Between
Yep,
46
it
and 64.
was.
Yeah, yeah. Statistics prove that. And they continued the ownership and things like that. They built this country. Whether they got full credit or not, is something in the record books. But then you got our generation, Generation X, and we kind of pulled back a little bit because that's when they started inventing credit cards. That's when it became a boom. There was a big push for going to college.
There
You
you go.
got to go to college. You got to
There
get
you
that student
go.
loan. You have to do that financial aid package, and whatever you don't make, don't receive from the government, you got to get a Parent Plus loan. You got to get a student loan, and you have to do it unless you got a scholarship, which many of us didn't know much about. Scholarships and getting grants and things like that. So that's when the debt really started to turn. So now you graduate, right? And you got $150,000, $200,000 worth of debt. Um, how could you buy a house if you have that much debt? It just kind of carries over, Terry. So um, we just got to be more aware of our finances. So I see you looking. You got somebody coming in?
No, can you hear me?
Yeah, I saw you look. Your eyes were looking like you were.
Yeah, I feel like I lost one of my feed somewhere, but I
No, no.
think we're here.
Yeah,
We're still
I can
good.
see, yeah, I can see you well. But you know what I'm saying? Now there's this push to get degrees and stuff. Look at you, brother. You don't have a master's or a bachelor's or anything like that, but your ability to create wealth is just as great as somebody who has a PhD in finance.
Well, I mean, guess what? The truth is that I have a great education, right?
Absolutely.
I all of my professional training has been at the pretty highest level, right?
Hmm.
I'm actually doing the work in the same way. And so
And you
no
licensed? You
yeah,
licensed?
I'm licensed.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Right. You know, they don't just get a license away, right? It's not a
Right,
certificate from some organization say I'm gonna
right.
credit you and stuff like this, right?
To talk about bank
um
statements and budgets or that kind of stuff. Yeah,
no,
you
that I
got to
mean
deal with real money.
that
You
yeah,
deal with
that's
real
real
money.
talk right there, right?
Yeah,
So here's the funny thing about me. Um I left Iowa, to come I wanted to wrestle. I ended up at Triton because of the great art craft.
the late
And
art craft.
yeah.
Mhm.
And so by the time I got there, Art wasn't there no more. Harry
Right,
McGinnis was the head coach.
and athletic,
But
right,
yeah. And so but I always knew I wanted to work in finance, to be honest. And so I left Triton. I went, and got hired at a firm, and we started doing investment banking stuff and all these other things.
yeah,
Um, and the thing that's absolute though is we have got you said something earlier that you said, where did the change start to happen? The change started to happen when we started telling people and students, if you go get an education, then it's going to open this massive amount of wealth. So we
right,
started believing, or started teaching young kids, if you go get a master's degree, you're going to make six figures and things like this.
right,
And I spent the better part of 20 something years of learning that that's not true.
yeah,
Right. Master's degree, you're probably gonna make 60 to 80,000, right, on average.
yeah,
um but that's not really the issue. The
right,
issue is not how much you make,
right.
it's not how much you save, it is how much you invest,
Invest.
right?
Period.
And in the Black community, again, we're kind of having a conversation that usually are reserved for our master's classes,
Right.
but I'll be brief on this level. But the best performing asset in the Black community, we believe it is what? Real estate, right?
Yeah. Yep.
But what's created more wealth and the best performing asset is the stock market.
Yeah. No
And
question.
so, this we have to have that conversation in a very truthful way. Starting with kids, I think we're going to be piloting a program, towards the fall that teaches investments as the core financial education, not
Absolutely.
personal finance.
Absolutely.
Right?
Because guess what? They're teaching their kids about finance in Hinsdale, in Barrington, in Burr Ridge, right? And they're teaching them on the Gold Coast. All right. They're teaching them in, Schaumburg. My point is this: they're teaching these kids about finances and not just consumer education. You know, we talked about this, and I pivoted back to Maywood for a moment. I am a strong advocate for the IB program. And I wish that we would have had Mr. David join us this evening to talk about his success as a young student going into his senior year at PMSA. This young brother is doing, great work at his young age. And I wanted the audience to hear what he had to say. Unfortunately, I guess there's a time conflict, but we move on. But my point is, until we in the community, and we, I mean, those who are part of the village of Maywood, directly or indirectly, change the mindset and get serious about finance. And that's through several components, mainly the IB program, because that IB finance program. In other states, Terry, including Virginia, you have to complete 1 year of finance to graduate from high school. It's
Yeah.
mandatory. It is the law. If you don't do that, you will not graduate. It's not just about community service hours.
Yeah.
You have to have at least 1 year of finance. And I'm not talking about budget and credit and goal setting like they do at the basic level for financial coaches who got their little certification. I'm talking about real finance, like with your expertise. We're talking about
Hmm.
fiscal policy. We're talking about assets. They talk about commodities. They talk about other aspects of finance, but they're talking about finance. You have to have 1 year of finance. That's not the case in PMS, Proviso Township, the state of Illinois.
So let me say a couple things. One, we're 26 minutes in, but we probably have to say this. We invited Mr. David to come today. And if you remember a couple of weeks back, we had an attorney that was supposed to come in, and for whatever reason, with them somehow they didn't make the show. We came on when we were supposed to, and they didn't, and that's unfortunate
Yeah,
because we can only do. We always talk about this in this way that we can control what we do. We can't control what somebody else
correct.
does. And so, whatever that means, we're going to invite both of those guests on at some point in the future, and because they're important conversations, and we don't want to, we don't want to be like, your band or however they go, whatever. We're going to give them the opportunity to redeem themselves. Is all I'm
Yeah, things
saying.
happen. Because
Yeah.
we actually heard from the attorney. He did
Yes.
contact us. These they're professionals. They have a busy schedule, so there's no
Yeah.
malice intent or anything from us. We
Yeah.
get it. We understand.
Yeah, and so, but here's the part that's important. And Mr. Davis planning on going into politics, and your ability to properly engage is the most important thing in terms of policy change and
Right.
being elected, right? And all these things, because the Bible says what we can know a person's character by how they treat the least of things,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Meaning the people that they feel like are not important. And that is an important piece for politicians, because politicians often are accused of only showing up
Yeah.
when they want to get elected, and then when they get into Washington, then they don't respond to the most vulnerable people of our communities, right?
Or they
Uh,
don't go to the churches until campaign season.
yeah.
They come in
So
and yeah,
yeah. So
absolutely.
you look at the big beautiful bill and all of the things that does not support the most vulnerable people in our community,
Yeah.
right? And
Correct.
how it negatively affects those them and things like that, taking away services, taking away jobs, and all these things. And so it highlights the importance of what we talk about in terms of finance education. We still have access to it, right?
Right.
There still will be wealth that will be created over the next 3 years.
Mhm.
However, are we going to sit on the sidelines, or are we going to be take an active role in electing officials that reflect our mindset and that has the strength to go into these rooms and advocate for the least of these, right?
Absolutely.
The
We've been
most
grateful to
vulnerable.
have, yeah, we've been grateful to have, some community leaders, some politicians, including Mayor Booker, and others, Trustee Jones, and, things like that. And, Madam Don Williams, and I mean, educators. We've had, a plethora of very impactful professionals on our podcast. But, we understand people's schedule get busy, and we can only control what we do, which is to come on the air and share the knowledge and expertise to the community. And for those who do not come on, we continue to move forward. And we wish them well if they decide not to come on. And in the case of the attorney, we'll see how our schedule works so he can come on. But one thing we do is bring on quality guests every
Absolutely.
single time. So we're not going to say, "Oh man, this person, can't show up." So we just going to bring on some emergency person and talk about whatever. That's not who we are, and people who know us in the community know this is not how we roll. So
So
yeah,
let's take a step forward and deal with one more thing. When I talk about having critical thinkers or forward thinking visionaries at the table and having the conversation and what that looks like, um, what are we going to do is the question I ask.
yeah,
If we look back a year ago and there's been a lot of conversation about the great work that Karen Yarborough did to get
yes, yes,
the casino money to benefit Maywood, Illinois, right?
yeah, correct,
And on one hand, that is a great space for revenue for Maywood residents and
yeah,
all these things.
yeah,
On the other hand, where I didn't hear any conversation about, and where I think the village missed and the members of the community missed, was as a member of Maywood, we had the ability to go and buy the stock individually of the casino,
yeah,
and nobody talked about it,
right.
right? That is where all the wealth is being created,
Absolutely, absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
The
Look,
value you
they just built a casino, Terry, not too far because I don't live too far from Quantico military base
yeah,
in Triangle, Virginia. Right down the road is the Rose Casino, huge. So they did the digging, built these big old hills, and there's that casino because that is where the money is in part. But to
Yeah,
your
I mean,
point,
at the end of the day, that's the conversation. We talked about it with Target. Now we're bringing it home to Maywood. That at the end of the day, yes, the village will benefit from the casino, but personally, how would a person close their personal wealth gap and increase their net worth? I make the argument that Maywood has a deficit of $8 million, and part of what they should have done was said, well, can we personally go in there and buy some ownership of
right,
the casino to
right.
get rid of the deficit, right?
Or at least ask
And
the attorney if they can
well,
even
that's what
ask
I
that
mean, though,
question.
right? At
You
the end
ask
of the
it, I
day, I
think his
think
name
it
is. Yeah,
ultimately comes down to village trustees understanding it and approving it. And there was something about Norway. I'll say this: I'm not gonna apologize or I'm not sympathizing with Trump because I think he's a jerk. However,
yeah.
he proposed a United States sovereign wealth fund.
Mm-hmm.
Norway did this a few years ago. They
Mm-hmm.
went from a deficit to a $1.8 trillion surplus,
Surplus. Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
And that's part of the if we're going to get away from what traditionally has created a burden, which is high taxes, right? Then
yeah,
we have to create these things that are creates revenue outside of the tax.
yeah,
And
yeah.
um,
It's
so
it's amazing that we are having a discussion about the same thing that George Washington and the other, generals and stuff fought at England against
yeah.
England. Taxes,
Hmm.
taxes, taxing everything. Soap, you know, anything that's coming, of course, the tariff tax. And so we have the same practice over 3 centuries later. It's the same thing. It's tax, tax, tax.
America became the very thing that we fought against,
Yep,
right?
absolutely, absolutely.
What was the famous phrase? No taxation with no
Without
representation.
representation, yeah,
Yeah,
taxation without representation, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That
We
is what
became
we
the
are.
very thing that we fought against, and the real question becomes moving forward: do we stay there or do
Hmm.
we evolve?
Right,
Right?
right. Well, the interest rate for the student loan. it's going to increase.
Hmm.
That's going to go up again. So that's going to be more debt. I know that Trump, Biden had the income driven, payment plan and that kind of thing. But and then you could go into, you could go into, well, I can't remember the term where you can have it set aside
Forbearance.
forbearance for up to 18 months or something like that. But that only lasts so long. When people are in
Yeah.
debt, how are they going to pay it when they run out, when that time runs out? And that's what we're talking about, just taxes and getting back to the village of Maywood. I know they get something every month or whatever, but what is the plan? What is the short term and long term goals? That I haven't heard. And in communicating with Mayor Booker, he said he would come on after his inauguration, after he's sworn in, back in June. So I'm looking forward to having him come on so we can ask him those questions, because he's doing a good job with seeking and receiving grants.
Hmm.
But that takes you so far because grants have deadlines. Whether it's 1 year or multi-year, but grants rarely have 70 and 80 years of perpetual funding cycle.
Yeah.
So my question is about the investment piece. How we're going to get out of debt? How is what's happening here at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue going to impact the budget that he set for the next fiscal year? I'm talking about in terms of Maywood. Are we going to keep relying on tips? I mean, are you going to have investors? Like those are the kind of questions that we hope that he can answer now, in this phase. Because he said his first term was kind of apprenticeship. He was learning and things like that, and by his own admission in our podcast. Now let's see if he's going to turn that apprenticeship into a prosperous Maywood.
Well, that's a fundamental piece of kind of what we've been playing around with all day today, which is, how do you solve the problem? Do you solve the problem in the way that everybody else has been going about it? Or should we be exploring new ideas and new
Right.
ways to go about it? Maywood, as we have said, is evolving. It's
Yeah.
changing the demographics. At one point it was
Yeah.
predominantly Caucasian.
Yep.
Then it became predominantly black.
Yep.
Now it's mixed use, right?
Yep.
Up north is Caucasian.
Yep.
And when you get a little bit south, it's starting to be more black and
Latino.
Hispanic.
Yep.
And
Like I
you
said, they
know,
didn't cross over Lake Street.
yeah,
They
right.
didn't come to the south side of Lake Street, but now they're here. Maywood is
Yeah.
changing. Maywood is changing. So you're right. You're right.
So the question is, right, moving forward, what do we do as a community to, we all agree on the thing about equity and, you know, um, whether or not, what we should be doing and things like this. How do we get there is the question. Is it continue to be high taxation? Do Will getting businesses into the community, is that a realistic goal when the entire world looks like it's going to be some level of delivery service on pretty,
I'm gonna say
whether go
no.
ahead.
I'm gonna say no. Here's why. So you remember when Mayor Booker was on, during the campaign? I mean, I think he mentioned bringing in 150 businesses and things like that, which is good for bringing in businesses. But my question is, are those businesses sustainable? Because
Hmm.
many of those businesses are fast food restaurants, um, beauty shops. There's a couple, um, outside of that, but the majority of those, Foster Shrimp House, um, soul food places, those don't have lasting impacts in the community. Not
Nor
even
do
in the
they
black
create a
community.
lot of jobs,
They
right?
don't. It's a very small portion. Yeah. So it doesn't really move the needle aggregately in terms of economic growth. And that also goes to the health and conditions of the black community, particularly Maywood, when you have a whole bunch of a Wingstop or whatever, fast food places in a small town like Maywood with populations like 24,000. That's a health concern. Diabetes, which is huge in the black community, right? Juvenile diabetes is what, number one, and diabetes is one of the largest health scares in the black community. So when you see all these fast food restaurants, they're not economically impactful. They are health impactful, but in a negative way. And there's that question about opening a grocery store. There's got to be an alternative that the village board is focusing on to make it Maywood healthier instead of freaking fighting all fighting on these board meetings all the time. Every time you turn around, they're fighting, but they're not
Yeah.
collaborating. You know, so what do you, I mean? What's your thought about that, as far as that economic standpoint?
Well, I think that's a true statement that, at the end of the day, um, you need small businesses, but you also need jobs, right, for the community to thrive. And so again, the lack of a strategic plan, and we sound like a broken record over the last year or so, and they
Yeah,
say they have, I forgot what it is, but um this is where you work out some of those ideas and really start to focus on, okay, how do we attract the right businesses?
right.
And there's a I've done some work in relation to grocery stores and the impact of grocery stores when you have a Walmart that is 3 miles, three and a
Yeah,
half miles from the
right.
community. um, is it realistic that you can have a competing grocery store and people, it will be able to say sustainable? Eh, I'm going to say no.
Hmm.
And I think as a Black community, we need to move forward from the ideas of having local grocery stores.
Hmm.
Now, again, that's very controversial
And you're
because,
gonna get a lot of pushback on that too. What are you
yeah,
talking about?
absolutely. But you know what doesn't, all we have to do is look at the data. And
Yeah.
what is the data telling us, right? As investment bankers, guess what? That's the almost the only thing that we rely on,
Hmm.
right? How
Hmm.
much sales?
Yeah.
What is the total marketplace look like?
Right.
What competitive advantage do you have? And
Right.
right, and then you make a decision about whether an investable idea, a company, or whatever. I make the argument that a grocery store in Maywood probably is not the highest priority thing that Maywood should be focused on.
Hmm.
Locally, where I'm from, we had a pretty large grocery store chain, and what goes along with the grocery store is fresh fruits and vegetables and things
Right.
like this.
Right.
And the reality of it is, the large grocery chain, they were putting fresh vegetables and fruits in the store, and they were losing money on it because people
Mm.
was not coming in and buying them,
Wow.
right? And so again, we're circling around in a lot of spaces, right? You go back to Target, and we go to Target, and we say, Target, please, we got what we asked for after George Floyd, didn't we?
Yeah.
We asked Target and other
Yeah.
places to put distribution agreements and buy Black products and
Yeah.
shelf them and things like this.
Yeah.
And the question that we have to ask ourselves and be honest about it is, did Black people show up to Target and buy Black product,
Mm. Mm.
right? And I'm not going to say yes or no. I want everybody to think about it
Yeah.
and then think about Target's response,
Right.
right?
Right.
Think about your local Black-owned businesses, and what do Black-owned businesses always complain about? Well, not Black businesses, the consumers. The consumers
Right.
go, prices are too high.
Yeah.
And Black businesses say, well, guess what? This is how, we can't buy in the same volume as Target
Right.
and Walmart and things like this. So we
Right.
pay more for the product. And so yes, it's high, but please remember that's more convenient,
Right.
right?
Right.
We want people, the businesses want to have that conversation, but in reality, are we doing that as Black consumers?
Right. What's the alternative, Terry? What do you think the alternative is to um, having a grocery store, not having a grocery store in Maywood? Because I hear people say, well, the money's leaving in the community when you go to Melrose Park or, Broadview or Forest Park to go shopping. What's the alternative to that?
Well, I think the alternative is that at the end of the day, we just got to think, what are the businesses that matter the most, and be okay with the idea that Maywood is not going to have a grocery store, and that people are going to drive 3.5 miles
Hmm.
to um, Walmart. I don't know how many miles Food for Less is, but
Okay.
Maywood,
Not that far.
yeah, Maywood is surrounded by grocery stores,
Right.
right? Cubs is probably, in the same three mile radius and things like
They
this.
are. They are. Forest
And
Park, I mean, they got grocery store. That's not too far from there. Um, like I said, I mentioned Oak Park, Merle's Park. They're around there. There's a Kroger distribution center in Maywood. How come they don't have a grocery store
well,
there?
but that's the whole point, though, right? That Kroger is food for less, right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But the question becomes again, does can Kroger as a business put a grocery store in Maywood and make the money, or should we try and ask Kroger to have a bigger footprint
Yeah.
and employ people from
Yeah.
Maywood
Yeah.
and things like this? I think that really is the thing that we should be after.
Yeah.
That come take on a bigger warehouse and set aside 20-25% of workforce
Yeah.
for Maywoodians,
I,
right?
it reminds me, Terry, of because you and I we travel. We're not just stuck into one space. All right, especially you. You travel all over the country and some parts of the world. But I remember living in Spartanburg, South Carolina, in the early '90s. I was working for Denny's as a general manager, and I got a promotion to the corporate office to work in the accounting department because that's what my undergrad is in. And while I was there, Spartanburg was real small. A small town, small country town. Really, not a lot of infrastructure, not a lot of businesses and things like that. Shortly after I left and moved here to the DMV the first time in 1993, there was a pitch for BMW and Mercedes Benz to go to South Carolina, and I can't think of the other state. I think it was Georgia, and they both had Confederate flags. Spartanburg needed that economic boom because they were going to other communities to grocery shop and buy cars and things like that, like Maywood.
Hmm.
And Georgia, they no Alabama, it was Alabama. They wouldn't take down a flag, that Confederate flag, and that's like we like our Southern values, da da da, and there was some push to remove it. So ultimately, they lost the opportunity to have a major car factory place. But then they took down the flag. They took
Hmm.
down that Confederate flag. Why? Because that was not a positive symbol, regardless of what your belief. It was not good, and it was a big opportunity economically for employment, for discounts on cars, benefits, things like that. Because it was factories and things like that in Alabama and South Carolina. So they got the Mercedes Benz plant, and
Hmm.
Spartanburg got the BMW plant. Guess what happened to the economy?
Yeah.
It flew up, and you got Clemson University, which isn't too far from there. You had a couple of other small colleges or whatever in the area. That economy grew 10,000 fold, Terry. 10,000. All right. Because they brought in a business, a company, a reputable company that promised jobs, tax breaks, and, you know, um, profitability. And now when I went
So
there last year, I didn't even recognize Spartanburg, and that's where Denny's headquarters is. It was the only tall building in Spartanburg. Anybody who lives in South Carolina or around South Carolina, look at Spartanburg, and it's big. That could be Maywood. That goes to best practices.
yeah, and so some of what we're talking about is, at the national level, in terms of Black people, we always talk about minority participation rates and what
Yep,
that looks like at federal contracts and things like this,
yep,
right? Maywood is doing a lot of grant money, and there's going to be a lot of construction work happening. You
yep.
have to ask yourself, is a Maywoodian participation rate
Right,
as well as the minority participation rate included in these contracts for the money that Maywood is getting that's going to do this construction.
right.
These are the kind of things that are, they're smart conversations, they're essential conversations that have to have in terms of, while we're talking about a grocery store, I think putting people to work has a better impact on crime.
Me
And
too.
I mean, you look at the crime statistics today, right?
Yep,
For the most part, we still talk about safe neighborhoods and things like this,
right.
but crime is going lower. Why?
Mhm. Yeah.
Because young kids, they have cell phones, they have
Yeah.
Jordans and things like this. So you think about the 80s and the 90s when people were getting murdered for their gym shoes.
Right.
Well, nobody's murdering nobody for no Jordans because they got a pair of Jordans on their feet already,
Right.
right?
Right. Right. Right.
They're not snatching people's cell phones because they already have a cell phone. And
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely.
when you think about this legislation, and I said this earlier, are we going to do what we have done in the past and what people have kind of prioritized and things like this, or are
Hmm.
we going to have some vision and say, if we approach it this way, we think that we can um increase the income of the average Maywoodian, and that's different than we got increased the revenue because the casino money came there, but
Right.
then the actual person that lives there still
Yeah.
hasn't had any real benefit personally.
Well, and it goes back to the economy. It's the economics, stupid. I mean, it's all about the economics. And I just mentioned about the Mercedes. I looked up real quick. The Mercedes Benz plant is in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where the University of Alabama is located. And they also have
Hmm.
one like in outside the outskirts of Tuscaloosa. But they got 6,000 employees at that plant. Guess how many the BMW plant has in Spartanburg? 11,000 employees, Terry. 11,000.
Wow.
Spartanburg
Yeah.
was barely 11,000 residents, man. It was barely 11,000, you know.
Yeah.
And they opened in 1995. 1995. And I left for DC in 1993. So, like I said, shortly after I left to come to the DMV and, took a federal contractor job, um, they started to put it in motion. So, I guess our point is this is deeper than finance. We're talking about
Well,
livelihood,
the
that impacts
cornerstone
people.
of it, I'll say this: the cornerstone of it, the foundation is finance,
Of course,
right?
you got
On one
finance.
hand, somebody's getting rich; on the other hand,
Yeah,
somebody's not.
absolutely.
And the question becomes, again, we have to get comfortable as people making the investment, not
As
just being a worker.
black people,
Yes.
black
Yeah.
people, not just people,
Being
black
part of
people.
the ownership group,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Finance is the baseline. Finance is where you plant the seed, but from there you build the economy. Why? Because who is not going to build themselves around a BMW or a Mercedes Benz or a Boeing?
Yeah.
Who's not going to do that? So Maywood has opportunities for growth if they put it strategically. You can't keep throwing dart against the wall and hope it sticks. You got to have a plan. You have to have a plan.
Yeah.
And so, you think about that. What I always Kroger, you've been here for 5 years. Give us more. We want more. We're giving you what you want. You could have went to any other suburbs, but you'd have paid a lot more. But you came to Maywood because it was cheaper.
Yeah.
We want 50% of our employees to be from Maywood or Proviso Township or whatever. These are our demands. All right. That's why you have to be aggressive, man. We're talking from experience. We're not just saying this because we read a book and passed a test, an exam. This is real talk, you
Yeah.
know. So we hope the politicians are listening. We hope the community leaders are listening, and hope they come together and think bigger, not just small. Fairhampton Pool, Fairhampton Aquatic Center, build a big center. Get people to invest in the casino, bring in like real infrastructure projects, businesses. Biden set it aside. Maybe you got money set aside that you haven't
Yeah.
spent yet from the Biden bill. Spend it, invest it. What you got in a savings account? You collecting what 2% interest on savings? Invest it. So
Yeah.
we're gonna talk about that.
I mean,
I'm
yeah,
gonna
you
suggest
have to ask your question, and this is the last thing I'm gonna say is, you have to ask yourself a question. As far as the pool, most people are thinking the pool as just a recreational place for the community to come, right? But um, should that idea be expanded and say, can you build a world-class facility that can host
yeah,
events
yeah,
in addition to
yeah,
a pool for people to go and enjoy things
absolutely,
like this? Because that creates more revenue that
yeah,
is not based off taxpayer.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It creates more revenue for the village and the park district and things like this. And
And
so,
I think Bear Booker's trying to get a sports complex built in Maywood. So I say good for you. If you can get that
yeah,
thing
but it's
going,
not going to
good.
include it's not going to include a pool, right?
It should. I don't know. I didn't see the blueprint. I haven't heard anything about whether it be a pool include. I think it's just you know
Many of the ones that I've heard about throughout the country, they're building these multi-court basketball places so
right.
people can come and things like this, and that's a
AAU
little bit.
tournaments and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
guess what? There's a vibrant swimming community
Oh yeah.
that,
Oh yeah.
again,
Oh yeah.
if Maywood built a competitive swimming place that goes along with the Fred Hampton pool,
Right.
would
Right.
that create value? I think it does,
Yeah. No
right?
question. Because
I think it does.
black people swim, contrary to popular belief, unpopular belief. Black people just don't
Yeah.
go to the bottom when we swim. We know how to swim. We know how to tread
Well,
water.
not only that, but think about this. Why do we thrive in basketball? It's an issue of access,
Absolutely.
right? And
And
so when
it's
you take
cheaper.
away that,
It's cheaper. It was cheaper. You got a
yeah, but
ball.
that's what I'm saying,
Yeah.
access, right? Whether
Yeah.
it's financial or whatever,
Yeah.
you take away the access. What happens when you increase the access
Hmm.
and black kids get the opportunity to learn how to swim and competitively learn how to swim? It open up doors for them to do what? Earn college scholarships,
Absolutely.
earn, maybe to be professional if they have enough in them and things like this.
Or be
And
a
so,
lifeguard. Be a lifeguard. Be a physical education coach when you teach swimming. I mean, so these are transformational skills that you're gaining. But again, it goes to the point of investing. When you build it, they come. But you have to invest to solidify the future for your children, your children's children. So yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, man. But finance is the base, but you have to do it in a certain way and have experts to provide that expertise, like yourself, Terry, that can go to have a meeting with a mayor booker and say, "This is what I see, and this is where you need to be, and this is how I will help you get there."
yeah.
And
So, on that note, I'm gonna stop talking. We've been talking for a while. You and I talk all the time, and so guess what? It'll
yeah,
probably be another hour and a half before we're done talking. But
yeah,
the truth is that um, you know, unfortunately, Mr.
David.
David,
Mhm.
Jarrell David did not make it. We're gonna invite him back on and see if we can get this
One more
right,
time,
because
one more time.
he is a someone that we should be talking about and supporting.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Before we sign off, Terry, I want to make a brief announcement to those who do tune in, who tuning in now and will catch us after the podcast. There is a all alumni cookout at Miller Meadow on this coming up Saturday. Everybody who grew up in Proviso Township should know where Miller Meadows is. It's for those of you who've been under a rock for the last, I don't know, 25, 30 years. It's on First and Roosevelt Road. So thousands of people attend from all over the country and even some parts of the world. The All Alumni Cookout, Miller's Meadow, this Saturday, which is on First and Roosevelt Road this Saturday, and then there is a alumni after dark, the Millennial Edition. It is taking place also on Saturday. I think it's after it is obviously after the cookout because it starts at 9 p.m. And it's from 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. at exclusive bar and grill located at 406 South Fifth Avenue. This is free advertisement. They did not ask me, but I just wanted to let the community know for those who may not know. And then there's a 25th year anniversary for Pirate graduates, graduated in 2000, obviously. It's a meet and greet on Friday at 7 p.m. from 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. at The Touch. I think it was called The Touch of the Past. It was a Touch of the Past. No, it's not. It was called The Touch. It's called The Touch. It is 6207 Roosevelt Road in Berwyn. Yeah, Touch of the Past is in Bellwood. So I stand corrected there. So this is called 8 Lounge. 8 Lounge, 6207 Roosevelt Road, Berwyn, Illinois. And that is all that's happening for this weekend. Sound like it's going to be a lot of great activities going on for the alumni, Proviso. 25th year anniversary. Congratulations. And then the All Alumni Cookout. Um, that's going to be a great time. And that's it. And on that note, thank you for tuning in to Let's Talk Maywood, where it's always Maywood all the time. I am your host, Dr. Reggie Ratliff. Please tune in for our next podcast, where we will have our next guest who will have done and currently and will be continue to do great work in the community. And until then, in this hot weather and the flooded areas, be safe, stay cool. Please do not go into any situations where it's flooded and you feel like it's worth taking a chance because it's actually a risk. And keep those who have lost their lives in your prayer. Please like us on Facebook and subscribe on YouTube. Thank you. God bless and good night.